welcome to the Guaranteed Analysis. We are so excited to be here. We have a very, very special guest, our very first guest, and a very special one at that, Dr. Lindsey Wendt. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. And I was not aware that I was the first guest. So what a major honor. Thank you so much.
Wouldn't have wanted anyone else. So glad that you're able to be here. Dr. Lindsey, will you tell us a little bit about your background? Tell the readers a little bit about your background and kind of what's led you to this place of being so interested in nutrition, and just take it away. Tell us about your fascinating self.
Yeah. Thanks, Danielle. So I trained conventionally. So I went to veterinary school and undergraduate at UC Davis. I did research as an undergrad. I'm actually somewhat obsessed with birds. So I minored in avian sciences and entering into vet school, I actually wanted to be a exotic veterinarian, so kind of more like zoo species. So I worked a lot with small exotics, but then I also worked with animal actors as a technician. So I got to work with some pretty cool animals during my time in training. And then once I graduated vet school and went into more advanced training, so a year of a really intense internship, I actually fell in love with internal medicine. And internal medicine and nutrition, in my mind, really do go hand in hand.
Peas and
So,
carrots.
yes, exactly. So from that point forward, I mean, my career, I'm still a veterinarian, but it has evolved dramatically. And a lot of that is actually thanks to my dog, Nala. So she developed inflammatory bowel disease, and I could not manage her well with the conventional toolbox that I had at that time. So I ended up delving into integrative medicine. So I became acupuncture certified, studied Chinese food therapy, kind of self-studied Western and Eastern herbology, cannabis, functional mushrooms, ozone therapy. I do sound healing now, Reiki, like really whatever she needed. I brought into my practice and really learned and am still learning to this day. And that has led me to really having even a deeper love and understanding and appreciation for the impact that really targeted, individualized, and high quality nutrition choices and how that can impact not only their current state of being, but also it really is a way of investing in their future. So when people ask me like what is the one thing that I really need to focus on every day? It's not what supplement to give, in my opinion, and this is coming from someone who is obsessed with supplements. It's really what food, and just being very mindful about those choices. And I know we're going to get into it, but that's different for every family and for every animal. And I think that's one of the biggest issues that we have as a professional community is nutrition is so nuanced. And I do not think that, I think there's a lot of our colleagues that don't view it that way. And it really, at the end of the day, is detrimental for the animals that are under our care. So I'm so grateful to be in community with people like you and so many of my other mentors that have such a deep understanding of nutrition and are an open book when it comes to supporting those of us that are also trying to explore that avenue even further.
That's amazing. And I didn't know that about you, that your love of avian and avian medicine was kind of your first and forefront. I also loved avians and was going to, well, thought about it for a minute. I actually wanted to double major in exotics and nutrition, but at the time I would have had to do two separate residencies. And I was like, nope, I'm
Mm-mm.
too old for that. That's not going to happen. It's too hard already. Just start with nutrition and trying to get into zoo. But yeah, I would go to the zoo conferences and went to Disney and got the behind the scenes nutrition tour at Disney Wildlife Kingdom. And I really loved wildlife and also the Pepperberg Lab, Alex, the African gray parrot, and communication. And I
Mm-hmm.
always thought it was so interesting how smart they are, and how much they really are unique beings. We tend to kind of lump, I feel like dogs and cats were better about being like part of our family, and we've kind of anthropomorphized them. But birds, people don't appreciate the avian species for just as remarkable as they are. What's your favorite bird?
Okay, so if at some point in my life I want a rescue raven, like I want a raven so badly. They are so majestic and incredibly intelligent. Parrots are very smart when it comes to vocalization and problem solving, but I think corvids really take the cake. So I am absolutely obsessed, but I also love larger birds of prey. So I did raptor handling in the past too, and I loved working with golden eagles and some of those other bigger ones. What about you?
I was going to say the same thing. Corvids. Just pick a corvid, any corvid, crow, raven, um, any, even blue jays are pretty smart. But I like the more of the charismatic megafauna within the corvids with the ravens and but also birds of prey too. They're incredible to handle, and they're just totally fearless and just look right at you and let you do what you need to do to them. Except for the ospreys, those tend to be a little spicier than the other birds of prey who will try to literally peck your eyes out. Where the
Yeah.
bald eagles are like, all right, here you go, draw my blood, do what you need to do, take the x-rays. And once you get them, like trying to get them, they're feisty. But once you have them and you calm yourself,
Yeah.
then they're fine. As long as you're calm, they're calm. But if someone is not calm, then they start trying to get away, because then they feel like
Mm-hmm.
they need to be afraid also. But otherwise, yeah. So in avian nutrition is fascinating. We
Mm-hmm.
could talk about birds all day. I don't know if our listeners would want to hear us listen to them. We would have a blast. I don't know that our listeners coming into the Guaranteed Analysis Nutrition podcast would want to hear you and I talk about birds all day. And your point too, nutrition is everything. And what is so refreshing about you, Dr. Lindsey is a breath of fresh air. For the listeners who aren't familiar with her, Crystal Lotus Vet is her practice. She's West Coast based, and she is truly integrative in that she blends conventional with other integrative modalities so beautifully. Has never once even come close to throwing away the baby with the bathwater. And sometimes people can kind of get too caught up. And I get it. When you learn a new modality, you're really excited about something. People tend to get really wrapped up in it and forget, like, oh, wait, but we really do need blood work and really should get a diagnosis. I mean, really, if the client can afford it, that's always the big caveat there. But I love the way and really admire the way that you blend both sides, and kind of do whatever it is that your patients need or what Nala, your own dog, needs in a way that just feels really not only authentic and beautiful, but also very science-based. So it's really fun to watch you and follow along with you. Your content is really amazing, and it does a great job of blending those two worlds.
I really appreciate that. Yeah, I think it's truly a mixture of science and art,
Yeah.
and making sure that the science is always there, but I think also in some ways having the courage to be a little bit adventurous.
Mhm.
Because that's how
Yeah.
we find some amazing new tools. Like some of the things that I use now regularly, if someone would have showed me what I'm doing, like the previous version of myself, even 4 years ago, I would have never imagined that I would be, like bubbling ozone in my guest bathroom to make ozonated glycerin, which it's just every day is different.
It truly is. And you have your background is so fascinating. You've done consulting for different supplements and even pet food companies, and worked with nutritionists and PhD formulator nutritionist and veterinary nutritionist. And also you have your home house call. What do you feel like are your most pressing nutrition questions, or what are some of the things that your clients are asking you about, or that you find, gosh, I really wish that we had more advanced training about this. So when I walked into the advisory board meetings that I have, I could, answer those questions at the tips of my fingers a little bit better. What are some of the things you think are, that would like to be illuminated more?
Definitely. So I think because I do really try to bridge myself between the more conventional or allopathic and then the more kind of holistic alternative sides of medicine, I think one of the biggest debates that even I myself really find myself sitting in the middle right now is synthetic versus
Yeah.
natural supplementation. Because from a holistic perspective, I would love if everything came from whole food. I mean, I think we all would, but also having the understanding that we have no idea about the bioavailability of those nutrients coming from whole food sources, how they interact with just that one whole food source and all the nutrients in there, and not even thinking about the whole entire recipe because there's so many components. But I see a lot of vilification of synthetics. And so one of the things that I would love to hear more about from you and just like your opinion on it is, how do you approach those conversations with people that are so limited in their open-mindedness to just truly have a discussion about the use of synthetics or even vilifying synthetics and the role that they do play?
That is a wonderful topic, and we're going to cover those probably in several episodes. One of which I'm going to have a few colleagues in here who do some formulating and do kind of the more whole food side of the formulating. So I almost want to do like a pros cons, where, with the protein debate and kidney disease, there's some people who like to, control it or lower it. And some of us, like myself, who like our protein pushers and like to keep it high and kind of give people both sides and then let them take away what they will. Yes, it really is. And this is something that I feel like, I was the president of the holistic club in veterinary school at the University of Wisconsin. And this is something that in the holistic world is kind of, I wouldn't say beaten into us, but really it is, synthetics are vilified. And what I find so fascinating is that often people don't understand what a synthetic is. And what's so interesting is that so I start with asking. So if a client comes to me, or a lot of times it'll be a colleague will refer a case to me or wants me to make a homemade diet for their client, and they'll say, well, no synthetics. And first thing I ask is, well, define a synthetic for me. What is a synthetic to you? Is this okay? Is this not okay? Or what do you usually use? Or what products are you comfortable formulating with and not? And what's so interesting, Lindsay, is that they're usually using and they're totally okay with a different synthetic. But if it's kind of packaged in a very appealing whole food kind of way, even though it contains synthetics, they're completely all right with it. So they don't recognize that. And usually where they want the most bioavailable form of the nutrient. And so for them, if it's like a vitamin A, they'd rather have like a retinol, more bioavailable. But then for other forms, and it really does depend on the name of the individual vitamin or mineral. Because I feel like some of the ones that sound, really, really complicated and scientific, they're the ones that are like, whoa, no, let's not put that in. And other ones that, if you call it vitamin B6, they're okay with it. But if you call it, pyridoxine, it's like, woo, I don't know about that. And so just explaining, well, pyridoxine is just vitamin B6. I'm like, oh, okay, then that's all right. And then having a deeper discussion of, sure, if we're formulating just for the one off, for the one patient, like if I'm just making a homemade diet for the one patient and we have direct communication with the client and we can talk about what to look for and what to happen, then we can use ingredients that are probably going to be balanced to the point where if we don't know how much that particular food item has of, pick a nutrient, iron, B6, copper. Copper is a nutrient that needs its own PR firm right now. But the problem is that the nutrients in the foods vary based on how it's grown, or in the animal, how it's raised. And so the sweet potato that's grown in Idaho has a different nutrient profile slightly than the sweet potato that's grown in Oregon, or even neighboring farms. You can even have farms, down the street from each other, and their vegetables or their animals have different nutrient profiles depending on how they're raised, or how well fortified the soil is, or if they practice, rotational farming and making sure they really replenish the soil in between new crops of food. So it can really vary wildly. That can be true said though of, the USDA database doesn't take, a huge enough, robust, like millions of samples. They can't. So it's usually based on, depends on the food, but sometimes it's just a single sampling. Sometimes it's in the hundreds or thousands. It just really depends. So knowing where we sit with that particular nutrient, like I said, if we're doing a one-on-one with that one client and we can really watch that client and say, okay, we're going to watch the animal. We're going to tell the client what to look for. We're going to really keep our hands on this animal. This is a dedicated client who's going to be doing, blood work every year. And we're really going to notice right away if, coat quality deteriorates or they show any other signs of any sort of, crusting on the paw pads, or, knows if it's a zinc deficiency, or we're really going to be watching closely for all those things. Versus when we're making a food for the masses, so we've gone from making from the individual animal to now we're formulating a product, whether it's a fresh product or kibble or canned. Now we're formulating it for the thousands, the masses. And so the margin for error is much, much, much smaller, because individual single nucleotide polymorphisms and how those animals absorb and utilize those nutrients, it varies. And when you get it into a whole food format, they have to digest and break down the food. So how much fiber is in that particular food, and then how much of that particular nutrient, and then once it gets into the body, what form it's predominant in, really can vary. Not only, we talked already about, down the farm and, sweet potato to sweet potato, but then now animal to animal. So now you have the variability of sweet potato to sweet potato, and now you have an animal to animal times 1,000. And that's why in science, we have nice, big, robust numbers give us the best statistical analyses and the most confidence behind what we're reporting, is because we have a huge sample. Because if something's going to go wrong, we're probably going to see it. If there's going to be a data outlier, we're going to find it. And so that tends to happen when we're formulating for the masses. And so yeah, like you said, in a perfect world, would we, even as humans, but we don't like
Mm-hmm.
to anthropomorphize and say that we are people, whole fresh foods and trying to get the very most bioavailable form of the vitamins and minerals that we can. But even in that, sometimes the most bioavailable form is not the type that's in the sweet potato. Sometimes, like I'm given vitamin A as an example, the retinol in its synthetic or purified form is the most bioavailable. And we have lots and lots of data, and we know exactly how that performs in the body as its synthetic purified form versus the sweet potato. It's, first of all, it's beta carotene, and
Mm-hmm.
dogs and cats, or cats can't use, they don't have the 15,15 dioxygenase to do that conversion step. Dogs, shaky. But when we give straight up retinols, the body knows what to do with it, assimilates it. We know what it's going to happen. We know how much we have to formulate with in order to reach the nutrient levels that we're looking for in the animal. And so, yes, it is really, really complicated. And I don't really know why. I've been looking into this a lot. I actually just did this as a research project, as a consulting project for a company. And I was really trying to look for the origins of where the fear came from
Yeah.
and why it's so bad. And the only thing that I could find, and I'll stop talking in a minute here because I've been talking too much. I want to hear what you think about this. Um, the only thing I could think of is it's that kind of appeal to nature fallacy of if it's a big word and it's a scientific word, we don't want to trust it. We'd rather talk about vitamin C than ascorbic acid. Ascorbic acid sounds scary. It's an acid. Whereas vitamin C, sure, we're fine with vitamin C. And so being told that we should be, feeding, this is coming back again too. This is coming back, unfortunately, and our government health administration right now. We're like, don't trust the ingredients you can't pronounce. Like, no, that's just science, and that we don't need to be afraid of it. But I think that's where it came from, because I can't find it from anyone else, and I've asked a lot of different colleagues and some holistic colleagues what their perception of it is and why. Where did it come from? When did they start thinking that way? Because a lot of the times, like I said, colleagues will be like, I don't want anything synthetic. And then I'm like, well, what do you usually use? Oh, I love this product. Well, actually, this has synthetic, this, that, and the other thing. Are you okay with that? I'm not saying it to pick a fight or to be contrary, but just trying to understand, why and what the comfort level is. And it usually is that they want the really highly bioavailable form, but then often that's the most expensive form too.
Mm-hmm.
And with the really highly bioavailable form, you don't need to use as much of it. Whereas there's other forms of vitamins, non-protonated, non-chelated vitamins and minerals that are a little bit less bioavailable, but they're not bad or dangerous or toxic. You need to use more of them to meet your target amounts within the formulation, within the diet. They're cheaper though. So you can make a product that's less expensive for your consumer, for the pet parent, pet guardian, by using more of it. But it's not toxic, it's not bad. And I even went in a deep dive and tried to find toxicity studies of different vitamins and minerals. And I mean, other than like iron oxides, I really couldn't find much that was, toxic. And I even asked some colleagues, like, were there any studies that, you found that were concerning for you, or that you feel, because you hear like, oh, they're toxic. It's toxic. It's toxic. These additives are toxic. It's like, well, what ones and how and where does that come from? But no one's been able to give me a I wouldn't say a definitive answer, but even something to chase down. Like there's nothing even to chase down the rabbit hole. I'm just following the white rabbit down the hole without any nuggets to chase down. And so I'd love to hear from your perspective. Similar, where do you remember when you first heard it, or do you know of any studies, or is there anything that anyone talks about in the circles that where this came from, this synthetics bad, whole food good?
Yeah, I for me, it actually came into my awareness when I entered into the holistic community. So
Mm,
before I started, going to the Holistic Veterinary Medical Association conferences, which are great, and you're actually speaking at this year, which is very exciting. But until I got into that sector of our professional community, I really hadn't heard that except from the occasional pet parent. And to be very honest, and this is not something I'm proud of, it has been a learning experience for me. I think it was one of those things that I would disregard as them not having enough education to be judging the synthetics versus the naturals that way, like when I was having that proposed to me. But also in my past conventional practice life, I convinced people out of feeding raw, which now I am, when done correctly, I'm a huge advocate of for the right patient. I mean, I've seen it shift animals' health in such a substantial way, but that is not the best diet for every patient. And I think that's where, as an industry, we have a huge issue. So I know I'm kind of getting off topic and like squirreling around, but the synthetic versus natural, I definitely heard that more from our community.
yeah.
I've never seen anything that's a true like evidence-based sort of proof of that. I think it's been a lot of, I mean, to be very honest, like opinion and
Mm,
emotion. And I understand where that comes from because I think that would be great, but also at the end of the day, more than anything, it's do no harm. And so if I'm allowing or giving permission for someone to rely only on whole foods to provide everything that their pet needs, I do worry about that long term now. Like, I guess I started over on this side where I was like, synthetics are safe. And then I went to the other side where I was like, synthetics are evil. And now I'm really in the middle where I think it would be great for us to have more research money put towards looking into, like you were saying, some of the more bioavailable forms so that perhaps we can use like the least amount possible to meet their needs. And again, we don't even know if that's actually better than providing the correct quantity of something that's less bioavailable that will end up, getting them the same amount of that vital nutrient that they require to be their best selves and be healthy. But I think the other huge issue is the amount of marketing and fear mongering and how much that is focused upon, and that people will actually end up feeding a less healthy food simply for that choice alone. And as someone who works in industry and advises companies, it is baffling to see the discussions between marketing and between the science side of things. Because my job is to make sure that whoever I'm advising, I am doing my very best to make sure that that product is as efficacious and as healthy for the pet as possible. And unfortunately, and I understand because it's a business,
mhm,
marketing has to worry about the perception. And because this is so prevalent, like, to be very honest with those that are listening, there are companies that are choosing to make a product that sometimes even knowingly is less healthy or they can be less confident in the end result long term simply because they are appealing to the masses.
mhm.
And it's a problem because there's not a very good, I mean, we have AAFCO. And I think we can both agree, AAFCO is certainly helpful, but it is by no means perfect. There really does need to be a better standard by
Yeah.
which we are guiding any type of food that's being manufactured and produced to hit certain requirements. And that's not happening. And I think that there's probably a lot of animals that have nutrient responsive diseases because their diets are inadequate and have led to issues over time. And that's very hard to pinpoint when you're feeding, the same diet year after year after year. Like, is this a random mutation from something in their environment? Is it something from their food that they've been exposed to repeatedly? There's so many factors that we're never going to be able to say that diet caused this in a long-term sense. Like, I just don't think that that is reasonable, but I would also love to hear your opinion on that. But I just think as a community, like, we really need to do better. And more than anything, I think that has turned into my focus. And for me, that ends up being a lot more supplement related, which that applies to supplements too. There's not enough regulation. And even the companies that are huge that are making products, I don't know how to say this politely, but like, it is shocking how little science sometimes goes into those products.
Yeah, science doesn't sell, right? Appeal to
No.
emotion, logical fallacies, things that trigger big emotions sell. And companies have gotten wise to that. And like you said, it is absolutely appalling. The number of products sitting on a shelf, the number of foods, even that our colleagues kind of get duped into recommending that
Mm-hmm.
really are subpar. They're not complete and balanced. They're not safe. There's courses out there. There are formulation softwares out there that didn't have a nutritionist anywhere near them when they were developed. And as a result, they are yielding formulas that are not complete and balanced. And to your point of a lot of nutrient deficiencies start off very insidious and very kind of broad, and not a lot of them are pathognomonic, meaning, oh, like zinc I had mentioned, that one's pathognomonic. You got your scaly paw pads, you got your scaly nose, you think zinc deficiency, where most of our other vitamins and minerals, it's, not doing well or lethargic and decreased immune function. And so how many animals are walking around out there with diets that are not complete and balanced from people who are wanting to do more whole fresh food and thinking it looks balanced? And sometimes it can be balanced on paper, but then once it
Mm-hmm.
gets in the animal, it's no longer balanced, because if they're formulating too close to those margins, or they're using ingredients and overly relying on those ingredients to provide the nutrients, but they're so razor thin, ooh, like that's where I think we can have more problems than they're looking to avoid problems, looking to avoid, cancer and inflammation and all those things by feeding whole food, but can be actually, in fact, creating the opposite. And when we talk about what is the most carcinogenic substance, one of them on the planet, it's a rancid fat. Like a rancid fat
Mm-hmm.
will cause cancer. We know, evidence-based, faster than anything else. And a lot of these whole food products are very high in fat and don't have enough preservative
Preservative.
in there to
Mm-hmm.
make sure that fat isn't going rancid.
Yes.
And our colleagues often are not taught what to look for nutrient deficiencies. And so I think it gets dismissed, and there's probably a lot more with colleagues who are recommending those products than we realize is happening.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love that point specifically in terms of preservatives, because that's another thing like synthetics that gets vilified, but people need to understand mixed tocopherols and rosemary extract and green tea extract. I mean, those are as natural of a preservation as you can have to keep fats and oils from becoming rancid and then inciting inflammation. And the other thing that may be a bit shocking to a lot of listeners, because I know it was for me, is the for a company to put a best by date on their product, they actually do not have to conduct any testing to verify that date. So there can be products on shelf that have a best by date for, 18 months from the time of manufacturing. Some of those are rancid at month 3.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And you, as a consumer, sometimes you can tell. Like, if you ever open up a bag and it smells rancid, trust your gut and do not feed it. Because I know a lot of people are like, oh, I don't want to waste it. It's like, if you think of feeding a pro-inflammatory, you know, unnecessary sort of food to your dog or cat, like, that's, I think, probably one of the prime examples that where it's happening and we don't even realize it.
Exactly. And that's the other thing that's so always interesting to me is when we're afraid to use a synthetic, but then we're okay with sometimes basket loads of supplements, right? Like the food should have everything that we need and should be in whole food format. But yet, take these 600 supplements that, are being recommended, and the wellness industry is I think it's like $6.4 billion industry. It's human
Yeah.
side, but I would imagine the animal side is probably pretty dang close to that as well. And
Yeah.
um, we don't really know how all of those substances interact and work in the body. And I'm very pro supplement. I love my supplements. So I'm not a supplement minimalist by or exclusionary by any means, but I also think that at some point it's like, okay, well, why are we doing 15 different supplements? Maybe let's just really make sure that we're feeding a complete and balanced diet that is truly actually complete and balanced, and not just complete and balanced on paper, that the company has done some testing or they're working one-on-one with their veterinarian and nutritionist to make sure that that diet is balanced, and just use very customized, individualized, tailored supplement protocol that we have, if not evidence to show it's efficacious, at least a proposed mechanism of action. That's always my big thing. I
Mm-hmm.
don't know what yours is
Mm-hmm.
when you choose a supplement or recommend a supplement, but I want the company to be doing testing, and not just testing at the time. I want food and supplements to be testing out through their expiration date, to your point, to make sure that that product is safe from the time it is made all the way in time it goes into our patients or our pets' mouths. And I want companies to be able to give me a proposed mechanism of action for every single ingredient within that supplement. Even if they don't have, the studies to back it up yet, I at least want them to be able to say, what's it doing and what are the contraindications? Like, who should we not be recommending this supplement to? And what are the potential interactions it has with other medications, like conventional medications, drugs, or other supplements themselves?
Mm-hmm. Yes. And I think that is one thing that, and this I've learned the hard way, the interactions between supplements. So Nala is actually a perfect example. Right now, she has a health condition where she's prone to nosebleeds. And I have noticed that there are a few of her supplements, like some I knew would increase
Mhm.
her chance of bleeding because it would make her platelets less sticky, decrease clot formation, but I am like watching it in real time. I can take her off her supplements, and when I start layering things back in, there are two that will cause her to bleed. And I don't think that is something, I mean, and this is me, micromanaging her as her mom and a veterinarian. So I take that thought and I apply it to all of the guardians out there that don't have that level of background to be able to apply it. And
Mhm.
it's concerning. So I think one big thing I would recommend is if you are noticing your dog or cat having a negative response to things in general, and if they are on multiple supplements, you need to have a conversation with your veterinarian specifically about that. I'm not going to say to stop them immediately because that can also, lead to detrimental effects, but that needs to be a conversation that we're having. And I think that also kind of comes around to another point of the level of comfort that conventional veterinarians have with advising their clients on supplements. And what is the answer for pet guardians that maybe their vet just says, okay, yeah, use Cosequin and an omega fatty acid, and that's really where their comfort level with supplements ends. And there's a huge world out there with so many other things. So, like, what is a pet guardian to do? And I don't have the answer to that right now, but that is something that actively occupies a lot of space in my brain on a daily basis. And I think that we need to work together as a community to create that. And I think when I say community, I am talking a bit more about the integrative community
Yes.
because I think it is going to be up to us to create some sort of resource because there's not enough of us physically to do it.
Oh, absolutely. And I always find it's interesting when I myself have been the target of um, the evidence-based crowd and certain skeptical veterinarians who have blogs and like to attack other vets. I've been on the receiving end of that because I will use supplements and do acupuncture. Um, and so they'll say, oh, we can only use medications or whatever that have double-blind placebo-controlled studies and huge meta-analysis to back up their use. Well, first of all, we don't even have that kind of evidence to support most of the conventional medications that we're using. Like, look at IMHA, right? Immune-mediated hemolytic anemia. And we don't have great research and evidence behind protocols that we use. It depends on the internist and the where they trained and what those protocols are. And there's starting to be more research now on protocols and what to do. But even 3 to 5 years ago, it was like steroids of sorts. See what works, kind of like throwing darts at a wall, see what sticks. But to also that point is, we don't even have the evidence to support a lot of the medications that we're using on the conventional side. A lot of it is dogma, if we're going to be honest with ourselves. It's just kind of handed down.
Mm-hmm.
And that costs money, right? Like
Yes.
clinical trials, and you're not just one. It's not just like a one-time study. You want like greater scientific consensus, like a big body of evidence, not just one. You want big meta-analyses with thousands and thousands of patients, and that's more common on the human side, very rare on the veterinary side.
Yeah.
But that costs money, and a lot of the smaller companies just don't have the funding to do that. And so then they have to make decisions. Well, okay, do I do the study, or do I use the most high quality, ingredients that I can use to make the supplement, or the packaging that I know keeps it safe, or the preservatives that I know are going to keep it fresh, or do the testing to make sure it stays fresh through the expiration date. Or, they have to make decisions because, like you said, it's a business. And so not acknowledging, just simply saying, oh, we're only going to use the ones that have the double-blind placebo-controlled studies, with 100,000 ends patients, we're only going to use that. That's not realistic either. And so where can we meet as a happy medium? And I think encouraging companies to do what they can and,
Mm-hmm.
donate money to veterinary schools. That's a great way that they can kind of get started, is they can do smaller studies with veterinary schools. Summer vet students and wannabe vet students are looking for summer projects to do, or over break, or shorter, smaller projects. And so getting started there, so you don't have to necessarily do the big clinical trials, but just doing some studies to show that it is safe, that it
Mm-hmm.
is maybe not have, quite the clinical efficacy trials that we're looking for, but a little bit of like understanding the mechanism of action and what's happening in the body. And is what we think is happening theoretically actually happening in the body? Are we seeing increases in certain antioxidants in their blood or saliva or feces, or increase in, a betterment of the microbiome, diversity of the microbiome, or just, pick whatever we're going to look at, just pick something and look at it on a small scale with a few ends, with a summer project that won't cost the millions and millions of dollars that a bigger clinical trial could. And then just, getting involved in research, maybe even sponsoring a summer student, maybe sponsoring an internship, maybe sponsoring a nutrition residency at a college. And people often think that just because a nutrition residency is sponsored, or a company sponsors something, means that they get to control it. They have no control over it. They actually just write the check, and then they lose track of whatever happens. They don't, the institution doesn't, and the individual trained doesn't owe them anything. So that is something that is very misunderstood, I feel like, and overly vilified
Yeah.
in the vet side. But trying to get the community, like you said, the community to hold these companies accountable and say, this is great. All right, now you're at a size of a company where, okay, like a beta corp certification is amazing. However, maybe we should wait for that until we've done some more testing on our
Yeah.
product to make sure that it's safe and effective, and
Yeah.
before we go on to something like a beta corp certification. So just really holding these companies accountable to that, and having our colleagues hold these companies accountable to that. So it's not just the few nutritionists that are, kind of like banging our hands on the desk wanting more, and having the whole
Yeah.
community want more, and realizing that it doesn't have to be huge, big clinical trials, just showing some sort of trying to move that brick of knowledge down the road and make sure that their product is safe and effective.
I agree. And I think that's also actually where pet guardians hold a lot more power and strength than they
Yeah.
realize.
Yeah.
Because as professionals,
Mm-hmm.
you would think that companies would listen to our opinions, and some do and some don't. But at the end of the day, where you spend your money does
So powerful.
dictate. Yes, it is incredibly powerful. I think we're
Mm-hmm.
especially seeing that now, as so I feel like the more we educate pet guardians and the more awareness they have behind their choices, and really guiding those choices to support companies that are doing the right thing, inevitably we're going to better the space. So it's not only a better, safer product for your individual pet, you're also creating a better space for your future pets. And for all of us, really, like, at the end of the day, I think that our collective goal should be to create the best life possible for every animal that we can. And I think that goes really beyond our pets, sustainability, and so many other aspects of things that I think it's beautiful when companies take that into account. But I also realize that can lead to increased expense. So it's just trying to find a way to just do the best we can in every situation and not fall prey to marketing,
Marketing.
because it is really effective. I mean, I get it. I do. It happens to me. I'll be
Yep.
scrolling through Instagram and I see an
Mhm.
ad and I just get sucked in.
Mhm.
And I really do try to take a step back and ask myself, as a pet guardian who doesn't maybe have that really strong foundation of knowledge, which I don't expect any of them to, right? It's like me trying to advise someone on the health of their child. Like, that is far outside of my realm of experience and knowledge. But some of these ads, I watch them and I'm like, this is despicable. I mean, it is preying so much on our emotions. Like, as a collective, we all love our animals so much, and that is known. So a lot of times, if people can, I encourage you to take a step back and try to look
Mhm.
through that lens when you're watching some of these things, because you will find that people are using really inflammatory language and really, like, pulling at your heartstrings to get you
Mhm.
to open up your pocketbook, and it's wrong
Yeah,
on so
if you
many
watch
levels.
something or see something, whether it's an ad on TV or on social media, and it elicits an emotional response, that's usually what I'll ask for clients or colleagues to just pause, just take a minute to pause, acknowledge what emotion it is that is. Usually
Yes.
it's anger or fear. Those are, or guilt. Guilt is a hugely
Hmm.
powerful motivator. And say, okay, is it, is that the goal? Is that what they're trying to do with this ad or what they're saying? Or is it just my own personal triggers and work that I need to do internally that's causing me to feel this way? That's not exactly what
Yeah.
they're saying. And a good way to do that is to show it to someone else. Like, show it to someone else. Call in
Mm.
a family member, call in a partner, show it to a colleague and say, what do you think of this? How does this make you feel? What emotion are you feeling? And if they have the same emotion that
I
you
love
do, chances are that's good marketing. That's the marketing at play. And I have a huge mistrust of any company that is using fear mongering, clickbait, and
that.
over targeting our emotions to try to sell their products. I think that is really wrong. I think they should focus on what makes the product effective. I don't mind showing a cute
Mhm.
dog or even like a cute kid hugging a dog or cat, or but where they try to make us feel guilty or we're not a good enough pet owner. That
Yeah.
also, talking about like privilege and an ad that was kind of seen around the world at the Super Bowl of, gosh, I know so many people that saw that ad and felt really, really bad. And we're like, I can't afford to feed my pet a fresh diet.
Yes.
And then they feel terrible. And then what do? They go to the grocery store and then they buy random stuff and put it together and think that they're doing a better thing than feeding a complete and
Yeah.
balanced product. And so any company that's
Yeah.
going to use that kind of fear. And then also I'll tell clients or even colleagues to, when they talk to a company, to try to figure out if that company is worth investing their money and their time on putting into their pets or even themselves. Ask the company, what are they doing to move the brick of knowledge down the road?
Mm.
And it's really fun to watch companies squirm when you ask that question. It is a special company that can answer that. And usually the person maybe you get on the phone or the email may not be able to answer that, but then push and say, could you please talk to your scientific panel or your
Yeah.
veterinarian staff, your technician on staff, or your scientific advisory members and ask that question. That's a really important question to me. And to your point about the power in the people, people have the power, the guardians have the power. If we start asking that more and more and more and making that commonplace, I'm not going to spend my hard earned money on this food or this product until you as a company can tell me what you are doing to move the brick of knowledge down the road. Maybe you can't do a clinical trial at this point in time. Maybe you can't sponsor, a residency or internship or, vet student summer program. What are you doing to advance the brick of knowledge down the road? Are you sponsoring a talk at a conference? There's so many different things that come. Do you have a scientific advisory panel? That's another great one. A lot of
Yes.
them don't. And then another question to ask is, do they listen to their scientific advisory panel or their chief medical officer? And I know that you personally, I know we can get into our name many names, but Lindsay has such integrity that she has turned down positions for big companies that I don't even want to know what kind of numbers they dangled in front of you, and
Yeah.
turned them down because you weren't going to have enough of an influence or say in what that company does. And at the end of the day, it's a business, and don't think that every nutritionist sitting in a company has the ultimate say and control and power. We don't. It's the people, the CEOs and the boards who end up making most of the decisions. But at least, do you feel valued? Are you listened to? Are you a contributing member of the product? So asking and demanding that companies do that as well.
No, I completely agree. To kind of pivot a bit, I did want to talk about AAFCO feeding trials. I know it's a big pivot,
Yeah.
but I'm curious your opinion because, and I don't know if you want to like outline for the audience just kind of the basics of what it is because if we're looking at like WASAVA guidelines, which I agree that would be a beautiful gold standard to have, but when you're taking into account most companies do not have the funding to be able to check all of those boxes,
Yeah.
like how do we judge some of these smaller companies that are doing really good work and are ensuring safety, but can't have a full-time nutritionist on staff and maybe can't afford to have done AAFCO feeding trials. And even the AAFCO feeding trials themselves, I guess on a personal level, and again, I am not a nutritionist, but I look at this as because it's a 6-month period of time, right? That they
Hmm.
undergo the trial.
Hmm.
I guess I just wonder, is that really enough time to be able to ascertain whether a
Yeah, it's
diet?
actually not even 6 months. It's 2 or 3 months. I was actually just going to pull up
Yeah.
my.
Okay.
I
Yeah.
have a quick because even I have to always look it up. It's not 6 months. It's between
Yeah.
2 to 3, and
Okay.
we can put this. I have a slide, and I can put it in the
Oh.
show notes as an
Okay.
infographic, because I think this is important that people understand what it is. It's
Yeah.
a couple months, and
Mm-hmm.
it's a set number of animals, and it's comparing the set number of animals against a cohort or group of them. So you got to have like a control group, and then you have a set number of animals on the food for a period of time, and then it's you weigh them, so you have to make sure that they haven't lost any weight or gained any too much weight. It has to stay within a certain percentage of the cohort, and
Mm-hmm.
then there are certain lab parameters that are drawn,
Mm-hmm.
protein status and a few others, and those can't change, and it's each one has a certain percentage off the baseline that it can't alter from. So basically the animal can't lose weight,
Mm-hmm.
and those particular lab parameters have to stay the same for a couple months.
Okay. But
And
it's
that's
really limited, right? Like I feel like it's albumin, maybe a
Yep.
liver value.
Yep.
I mean,
Alkaline phosphatase,
okay.
albumin, total protein. Um, yeah, it's very specific, and it's a few. Um,
Yeah, it's not a comprehensive panel.
it's not a comprehensive panel by any means. So it's not a CBC and chem and
Mm-hmm.
urinalysis. Like it's maybe 5, 4, 5, 6,
Yeah.
not a lot. And to me, it's a bare minimum, right? Like an AFCO trial is
Mm-hmm.
really that's a bare minimum. But even then, that bare minimum is
It
expensive.
is. It
It's
is.
really expensive. And with an AFCO trial, you're learning, is that animal staying alive and not losing weight and maintaining those few lab parameters for a couple months?
Mm-hmm.
Yes or no? And that's the other thing is it takes a pretty egregiously poorly formulated formula to fail an AFCO trial.
Yeah.
I think it's much easier to have a poorly formulated product go through an AFCO trial and be okay. What
Mm.
would be best would be long term. 6 months would be
Yeah.
incredible. Like if there was a 6 month trial on every product out there, that would be amazing. I think we need years long or lifetime studies
Mm-hmm.
on a lot of these products. But you want to talk about expense, like there's no way. Like that's millions of dollars worth of research right there.
Yeah. And for one
And
recipe, it's not even for their full
ex-
suite of products. So it's just not it's
exactly
not possible for companies that are not already huge.
right
So
to
I
be able
guess
to do. Yeah.
yeah, so I guess what is in your opinion, what would be the best way for a smaller company to provide the information that helps us
Hmm.
feel like the product is safe? Because what I have been utilizing is mostly Eurofins AFCO testing. So that full panel that
Yeah.
looks at all of the nutrients knowing that it does not tell me anything about bioavailability or what's
Yep.
happening within the pet, but at least I know what is in the bowl is
Mhm.
meeting the minimum requirements.
Yes, yes, absolutely. And I think doing companies need to do that periodically. So sending those numbers out every run, especially if they're getting their ingredients from a different supplier or a different vendor, then repeating that, because a lot of companies will just send that out once and one and done. So yeah, sure, they were AAFCO formulated 10 years ago, 16 vendors previously, and they've never tested. So I think that is something that needs to be, and a lot of the companies that have the funding to do so will run that every single, like the therapeutic diets,
Wow.
it's every single time that they run the food, because we need to make sure that phosphorus, that iron, that vitamin A are very tightly controlled, because we're using it as part of the treatment for that disease process. There's not medication in there. That's not everything that's going around. But we're relying on that food to be part of our treatment protocol. So an over the counter healthy dog or cat formula doesn't need to be that tightly formulated. That's why there's mins and maxes percentages that are allowable in AAFCO. But at least having that done annually, with any new changes in formulation or new vendors. And if they can, like doing a little bit of digestibility testing,
Mm-hmm.
I think especially if they're using any novel ingredients. So any ingredients that aren't commonly formulated.
Right.
I really love the idea of more environmentally sustainable products, but in using these ingredients, they haven't been used in pet food. And that's where it starts to be like, just because it has a certain manganese level doesn't mean that what is what being absorbed in the body. And digestibility testing is not always affordable, and bioavailability testing isn't always possible. We're not going to pull the livers out of animals, grind them up,
Yeah.
and send them off for mineral analysis, which is what it would kind of require. But at least if they could do PDF, AFCO testing, maybe annually or every couple of years, periodically, to make sure it stays. And then also if they could do some digestibility testing, and then also working with a scientific advisory panel, like having a scientific advisory panel, but not an echo chamber one. Like you've seen the
Yes.
scientific advisory panels where it's like, okay, all holistic vets for a whole food product, right? Like, no, no, no. We want actually the best thing to do. And so we don't fall prey to misinformation
Yeah.
is to make sure we're following people with different ideas or
Yes.
experiences, backgrounds, expertise than ourselves. And so really having someone that can play devil's advocate against a product and really push it and make sure that it is staying safe and effective and holding the company accountable to their marketing, and having those experts have eyes on the websites, on the marketing materials, and getting their input on how they could formulate better or what they could do better, or they have some money coming up available because maybe their product did really well last quarter, and what should they do with that money? What research should they do? And having that advisory panel available to do that, I think, is a really great basic thing that they could do that could have a very profound impact on the industry as a whole, the health of animals, and then also our profession
Mm-hmm.
as well.
Yeah, so I think, one thing I have started advising people, because I do, many of my clients and patients are on either raw or gently cooked diets,
Mm-hmm.
just because of the conditions that they have and what kind of lifestyle that clientele has. So, one thing, and I do this for them because my practice is small and concierge, so they get that level of my involvement. But for those out there that are trying to, explore this on their own, reach out to the company and ask them.
Mm-hmm.
Ask them if they are submitting their recipes for, and it's called like an AAFCO nutrition analysis. And it also
Mm-hmm.
should be a lab that is universally respected, because there
Yes.
are a lot of labs out there and they do not all have the same level of quality control. So, in general, Eurofins is the one that I have seen pretty much everyone across the aisle agree is a great
Mm-hmm.
gold standard. But Danielle, I wasn't sure if there's any others that you just off the top of your head, or like you've seen good, reliable
Dairy One
results.
does a good job, but Eurofins really is it's the gold star. It really is. Or if they're going to use a smaller lab, just make sure that it's validated and they have validated their testing against like what Eurofins or some of the bigger companies do. Because to your point, companies can be like, yeah, we have testing, we've done it. And Yeah, sure, I can do testing in my kitchen. doesn't doesn't make it validated. It doesn't make. I mean, it doesn't have to be a kitchen. I could do it in my bathroom. I could do it in the corner here in my office. Like, it doesn't have to be validated. So making sure that it's validated is a really great thing that companies can do. Yeah.
Yeah, I think especially for those people that are feeding more gently cooked or raw, and if you're
Hmm.
spending that level of money
Yes.
on what you're putting in your pet's bowl, please make sure that the company is doing their job
Yep.
and ensuring that they are not only making sure that it is complete and balanced, making sure that for dry products there is like shelf stability studies, ensuring that they're using, and I know this could be a whole nother episode, but for raw food, kill methods that are known to be effective. So,
Mhm.
and I'll bring it up because I know that we love to talk about this and it's been a hot topic with H5N1, but high pressure processing. The the idea that that is going to negatively impact the quality of the food and the nutrients of the food is something that originated from the holistic community, and this is like admitted by those that originally shared
Mhm.
this information and were educating based off of the opinions they had then. And it has percolated through without any solid evidence
Yep.
to support it. But there is solid evidence to support that it is an effective kill step for a lot of pathogens that can otherwise cause foodborne illness in humans and in animals. And it also, in some cases, for certain nutrients, it increases the bioavailability of those
Yeah.
nutrients. So the idea that HPP is less than compared to
Not.
non HPP
Yeah.
foods, honestly, is
Asinine.
it's an opinion. And
Yep.
it's not an opinion that is doing anyone any good at this point in time. So please, 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 if you're not even if you do happen to be feeding raw, and if you don't know whether or not the food that you're feeding is HPP or not, that is something that I really encourage you to explore.
Hmm. Absolutely. That is a wonderful point. And to add on to that, making sure it's validated HPP, because there are a lot of
Yes.
companies now that are jumping on that bandwagon, like, oh, yeah, we HPP. But are they validating it? Meaning, are they taking a pathogen like Salmonella or E. coli and testing it in their food and making sure that they're getting either a significant log reduction so that it is safe at the time it leaves the warehouse, but also are they holding on to it and testing it periodically and putting it through similar conditions that a pet guardian would, so that we again know it stays safe, because bacteria can stay in that food, right? And HPP can bring it down. It can do its job and bring those levels low and maybe undetectable low, but it doesn't mean that there's not any bacteria or H5N1 enough in the product to be problematic until it has a little bit of time to multiply and be problematic. And so making sure that it stays safe all the way through and that that testing is validated. And a lot of our colleagues don't realize that, are trying to vilify a kill step method. Most of the organic grapes at Whole Foods have been, most of the organic fruits and vegetables you're going to buy at Whole Foods or even your local co-op or your local market have been HPP'd. A lot of the seafood, a lot of the um,
Like the
fruits
fresh
and
prepared
veggies.
foods, right? Like the
Yeah.
guac and
The
everything.
guacamole.
Yep.
That's why it's not going brown. It's been HPP'd. And it's been so extensively tested. It's very safe. And
Hmm.
it is not altering the nutrient profile in any meaningful way. Like you said, it might even be making some a little bit more bioavailable. But the whole point of it is it doesn't affect any of it. It's very specific with bond type. So it's not going to be in there affecting any of your covalent bonds in the food. So it's really not going to have any meaningful impact. You would eat a grape that was HPP'd and a grape that's non HPP'd. You're not going to know it. Your dog's not going to, like, not we're going to feed our dogs grapes, but you know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah.
you're not going to be able to taste it or detect it or know it's any different. We're going to run a nutrient profile and it's not going to have a harmful effect on it either. And that is another thing where it's another return to nature fallacy of, oh, the food shouldn't be altered or adulterated in any way, shape, or form. But technically, even like washing produce is some form of processing.
Hmm.
So yeah, we got to be careful about vilifying things that we don't understand and just thinking that, the sweet potato fresh out of the ground covered in the dirt is the best form of that product,
Yeah.
and that we shouldn't do anything to it. So yes, absolutely. And the fact that there are colleagues out there that try to minimize the risk associated with raw or fresh, or even whole food feeding, without adding the synthetics, and don't educate the pet guardian of, and this is the philosophy, this is the way I feel, this is how I practice, it does pose a risk. And that they don't even have the discussion, that's not informed consent. Like that to me is, you're not like, they could have their licenses questioned by our boards because they are not following our oath and not giving our clients opportunity for informed consent. And if the client chooses to assume that risk, and there's risk associated with everything, anything has its risk, any supplement, any medication, even kibble has a risk too. So to try to just be like, oh, here, go feed this raw food, and it doesn't have any risk and it's fine because dogs don't get salmonella or whatever, myth they're perpetuating is, that I think that that's really wrong. So at least letting people choose and informing them of the risk and letting them decide if they're comfortable with that level of risk in their house.
I agree. And I think
And
it
it's their
also,
decision.
it also widens the divide between the more conventional veterinary community and those of us who are trying to really bridge both sides, because there's beauty behind both. I hope what I've been saying has not been coming off as trying to negatively speak about the conventional community. I have so much love for the
No,
conventional
I
veterinary
wouldn't.
community and
Yeah.
everything that they're doing, but I also have awareness, even for myself, when I was not practicing this type of medicine yet, I was often very close-minded. Like, I will admit that. And I don't know where that comes from, because I do find that that is more common with some of our conventional colleagues. And I don't know if it's because of the way that we're trained, or what it is, like the type of people that are attracted
Mm,
into veterinary medicine. I'm sure it's a much deeper psychologic
yeah.
exploration than we could get into. But I think it's important for us all to be forever learners, despite what side we're coming from, because there are always new things being found out. I mean, the day that I stop learning will be, I can't even imagine, because there will always be something new. There's things that have been around for 20 or 30 years
Yep.
that are being used in other countries that we don't even know about here, that are incredibly successful. And so there's always more to learn. So I think that's just really important, is for us all to be respectful of each other and
Mm-hmm.
have an open mind,
Yep.
because
Open-minded skeptic is really the way to, I think,
I love that.
right, we should all be skeptical. We should always question. If
Yes.
something sounds too good to
Yes.
be true, it probably
Usually
is.
is.
And always questioning too, right? So we don't fall into our own patterns of, behavior and our own biases, and surrounding
Yeah.
ourselves with people who can have those challenging discussions in a respectful, kind way, like you said, in a kind, respectful way, without name calling or making anyone feel bad, but saying, hey,
Yeah.
why'd you do that? Or what's going on with that? Or what do and think, oh my gosh, I'd never realized that was a blind spot that you've opened for me that I wasn't even
Mm-hmm.
aware of. And maintaining that connection with our colleagues and being able to have those sometimes hard and uncomfortable conversations in a kind and respectful way is so important, with as an open-minded skeptic. So open-minded, willing to consider it, hear that, you know, proposed mechanism of action, even though there's not a double-blind placebo-controlled study behind it, but also okay, company, prove it to me why I should be recommending this product to my
Yeah.
animal that you're thinking I should add to my tool belt. Convince me first, and then show me, let me have some samples of it and try on my own animals. And I'm going to start using it in a few patients and seeing how
Mm-hmm.
ones that, those really special clients who will tell you, and that
Yeah.
notice the littlest things in their animals. And you love trying new things in them because you know that they're going to notice if something,
Mm-hmm.
and they're great about everything else is controlled. They're not going to be changing 16 things at once. So it's like
Yeah.
everything's very the same, and they try one thing and then you try more. And if it works well and you see it work in certain patients or not, but yeah, having that open-minded skepticism
Yeah.
and
It's
not
really
putting ourselves in
important.
echo chambers, I think is the
Yes.
other really important thing. So that's the other
Yes.
thing you see happen on both sides, is really easy to fall into an echo chamber. And I do wish
Mm-hmm.
there was more open interactions between colleagues of both sides.
I do too.
Um, More willingness to have those hard conversations while respecting. So the other thing is that you see the experts are not respected if they don't echo
Yeah.
exactly what the other person is saying. So it's like, oh, well, that person, they just shut it down. So, oh, that person, yes, sure, they're expert, but they were the shill theory, they're bought by a company, they're too influenced by a company. It's like, well, first we have to ask, is it true?
Mm-hmm.
There's a reason that
Yeah.
when we break
Step
down a
one.
journal article, we look to see who funds it, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
there is something to say about that. But then if
Yeah.
it's, oh, okay, this researcher took money from this and it says this, but they've also taken money from 65 other companies to do their
Yeah.
research. Okay, they're probably not going to be overly biased about reporting findings on one side or the other. So,
Yeah.
yes, this is such an amazing discussion. And we talked about, I feel like there's a lot in here. We could almost make this a double episode. There's a lot in here, and would love to have you back and talk more about nutrition and your background. And we didn't have time to get into it in this particular episode, but maybe hear more about individual patients that you've had and particular diets or nutrients even that you feel like was really life altering for that patient. Because I think that's always really inspiring for pet guardians to hear about is, gosh, I see myself or I see my pet in that client. Maybe I should
Mm-hmm.
reach out to an expert in that area and try it. Especially with things that are, we don't get as part of our conventional veterinary training, and having somebody who can guide them in an evidence-based way through some of those things. So yeah, I would love to have you back
Thank you. I'd love
and talk
that.
about some specific patients or even some, I wouldn't say products like by name, but maybe just
Mm-hmm.
general, like what are your favorite, supplements and why? And you're very, very experienced with CBD and hemp, and we could have you back just to talk about hemp and
Cannabis. Yes.
products and
Yes.
cannabis and
Yes.
its mechanisms of action and contraindications and interactions. And that I think would be fascinating because that is a hot topic that
It
everybody
is.
on the uncle wants to be on themselves or their
Mm-hmm.
pet.
Mm-hmm.
But similar to the products that are out there, like everything, and
Yes.
things can be lucrative for companies. They tend to glom on for the wrong reasons.
It's very
So,
true.
well, thank you
Yeah.
so
Well,
much.
thank you for having me. This is so great. And yeah, I look forward to continuing the conversation with you.
Amazing. Well, I'll definitely have you back.